Hi, it's Tony Cavalier with this Tuesday evening version of Weather Extra at WSAZ.com. Let's start with our weather, but let's spend a lot of time on the weather heading to the coastal Carolinas by the weekend. Hint, hint, that means something big may be up. First alert through the upcoming weekend. You might ask why? We're on cold wave alert. Before all is said and done, by the time we get to early next week, 240 consecutive hours of below freezing air would have occurred, including since this past Sunday. And you can add 72 hours to that in interior Ohio, so more than 300 hours will have occurred. Utilities threatened, well, we're going to see some water main breaks, perhaps. We've seen that in other years that have been like this. And naturally, we're worried about your frozen pipes, right? Continue to run that pencil-thin stream of water and open those cabinets underneath the sink. And we continue on sprained ankle alert. You know the deal. As hard as the ice is, as expansive as it is, a slip is easily possible. I understand there have been some Ohio River ice flows, and I expect that to be more common as we get into the heart of this cold wave. So that's our weather. I want to look at the weather at Myrtle Beach, and the first way we're going to talk about that is the expansive snowpack across the eastern United States, all the way down into North Georgia, into northwestern South Carolina, and all the way over to the coastal Virginia area and up into the Delmarva Peninsula. Oddly, there is an area in America's heartland that doesn't have snow on the ground. In order to break the all-time record, which goes back, for example, to the harsh winter of 1977, you really have to have this area filled in. Doesn't look like that's going to happen in this pattern. However, what is happening, look to the north. Can you see this huge swirl up on the Hudson Bay? This is the polar vortex coming down from the North Pole. At the top of the world, you've got the magnetic North Pole. The polar vortex, which indicates the coldest air on the continent, has moved away from the top of the world and is basically moving into the Canadian provinces near Ontario. So that's the polar vortex, and it's associated with bitter cold air coming out of the Northlands. At the same time, helping to fuel this pattern, we did that toothpaste demonstration on our winter weather special. Mild and moist air is racing up the west coast of Canada, courtesy of low pressure, a huge whirlpool out over the open Pacific. And what that's doing is it's dislodging the cold air, the polar vortex, and putting it down into southern Canada. And that's supplying us with a frequent arrival of fresh, bitter cold air. So when we put the weather maps in motion, I want you to watch how the cold, bitter air in purple heads southward and eventually incites low pressure development. And in fact, polar vortex sending bitter cold air all the way down into the coastal Carolinas and low pressure forming off the southeast coast. This pattern will ensue by the time we get to the end of the week and the weekend. Think of it this way. Our climate is taking on a climate more typical of Minneapolis, Green Bay, and Chicago. The weather patterns shifted south. So if it's shifted south into our area, what's happened is a typical winter pattern for us is heading down and has already arrived in Myrtle Beach. So when a storm forms off the southeast coast, it looks like it could turn into a rare southeastern United States nor'easter. In fact, our supercomputers are suggesting this bombs out at sea. If it was to somehow back into the northeastern United States, it could be an out-and-out blizzard. So how do we come up with that type of designation of the weather pattern? This is the European model, and it's Friday afternoon. A period of snow is likely giving us a coating of snow as we get into Friday and Friday night. That would be commensurate with the start of the WSAZ Wrestling Invitational. As this heads south, low pressure forms off the southeast coast. Now again, this is a simulation of what's going to happen several days into the future, so naturally it has to be fine-tuned. But the European model suggests it rains out over the open ocean, but with the bitter cold air all the way down to Myrtle Beach in the coastal Carolinas, on Saturday morning an all-out snowstorm could be in progress if you believe the latest run of the European model. And that would include from Myrtle Beach, even Georgetown, north to Nags Head, up toward Elizabeth City. Obviously, there's many opportunities for this to change over the next few days because the storm doesn't exist right now. But the weather pattern, if you think of our climate as more typical of Green Bay and Minnesota, and you think of Myrtle Beach's weather as more typical of here in Huntington, Charleston, you get the idea how the weather pattern has shifted to the south, and that could put them in line for a rare snowstorm. It happened last year when a storm came from the Gulf of Mexico. Do you remember that? In this case, the storm's forming out over the Atlantic Ocean, and will be something that meteorologists across the country will be fascinated with heading into the weekend. Can you see that curly Q putting snow into eastern North Carolina and even out over the ocean? That's just how cold and how stormy this weather pattern could become as we get to the end of the week. Okay, 7-day forecast for us. It's red across the board, as in alert days. Why? We'll just scan the overnight low temperatures. Wednesday morning dawns at 8, and then look at those low temperatures. A few degrees above, a few degrees below zero, right through the weekend. And by the way, there will be a few spokes of energy and moisture that will be passing, courtesy of the rotation of the polar vortex. So any one day or night through this period could feature a dusting or a coating of snow. In particular, the European model will suggest Friday would be our best opportunity for a coating of snow, perhaps a few inches across parts of the area. It's all part of the polar vortex. Second go. We had one back in December. We've got a second one here in late January, heading into the 1st of February. Can't wait to see what the groundhogs say next week as Groundhog Day comes on the 2nd of February. Thank you for watching Weather Extra at WSAZ.com.